second goal for the sprint 4 of our capstone project was the user must be able to save his messages and view them later on logging into the portal. The manager must be able to fetch and view all the threads and messages with the clause of anonymity intact. The manager must be able to change context and view his or her feedback sent to his supervisors. We had three user stories in this sprint 4. The first one is user story 78. As a manager, I should be able to change seamlessly between my employee and my feedback tabs and view all the threads as applicable. So, task number 101, implement all APIs with the UI. This was a backend task which dealt with creating all the APIs, like creating a new thread and creating a new message that persisted the data into the database. So this was it. And then the task number 84 is remove new thread button from employee feedback page of manager view. So in our app, for manager view, he has two different tabs. One is the feedback that the manager can give to his own managers. So in this view he can create a new thread, but he has the other view in which he can respond to the concerns of his subordinates. So in this view he is not supposed to create new threads. He can only reply to the messages that he has been sent by his subordinates. So the next task, task number 80, integrate backend for manager view using GraphQL. So this dealt with all the connections of the GraphQL API requests from the front end to the schema, and from the schema to passing on to the database. So this task dealt with that. Now the next user story, 77. As a user, I should be able to have a seamless feedback conversation with the managers so that I can voice my concerns. So the task number 83 says call the backend GraphQL API when a user sends a message on an existing thread. So on an existing thread, if I type my response and send it, so this basically calls the API, calls the backend API, and persists the message into the database. So this task dealt with it. The next task was to integrate create new thread functionality with the server-side GraphQL API. So let's go to the application, and if I click on new thread, I can create a new thread to my manager, hit send. As you can see, it created a new thread addressed to Jim Atwood, the manager. The next task is to add a login component to save the user in a context by calling the GraphQL API. So as part of this requirement or the task, a login component was added where the employee can log in, and all this information can be fetched from the backend and then loaded into a context into the context of the application. Now the next task, task number 87, add entity relationship to the Java models corresponding to database tables. So this was a backend task which involved implementing Java models that followed JPA standards. Then the task number 104, log into the application based on manager or employee email. So basically, if a manager logs in, his view will be kind of different from that of an employee view. Let me just log in from my employee email ID to see the difference in the view. So user type is employee, and his view looks like this. Now the task number 88 is to create individual GraphQL schema for different entities on the server side. So basically, GraphQL APIs, they take in inputs, and these inputs can be simplified and grouped into a single input type, and certain restrictions can be imposed on the input type. Um, so this was the task that um now the next task, task number 81, update discussion pane based on the feedback type. Um, so the feedback type is what I was talking about earlier. So the manager has two different feedback type. The employee feedback is like his subordinates feedback, and my feedback is actually his feedback to his superiors. So the task number 81 was about changing the views for the employees based on the type feedback type. Now the next user story is, as a manager, I shall be able to reply to the messages sent by the employees so that they can view my response. Task number 85 is to fetch all managers of the employee and display on the list while creating a new thread. Um, so the list of managers that gets populated in this drop down was done as part of this task. Task number 100 and task number 92 and task number 91 dealt with creating a framework on the backend where different APIs can be created, whether they are mutation APIs or they are query APIs. And task number 100 is to create Apollo queries on the React.js side. So basically, the GraphQL queries are converted into the format that Apollo recognizes on the front end side with namespaces and the data that has to be sent. So this was part of task 100, and the last task was create Java models for input schemas. So these input schemas actually deserializes the GraphQL requests on the backend side. So this task was about that. Look at the burndown chart for the sprint. So this was our burndown chart.